Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is October 9th, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Giving a review, whatever medium you're listening from, also helps. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe, or you can just go to nativecalgarian.com for all the podcasts. And I'm also have pinned posts on all the social medias. And always remember to share the things you learn to your network. Oki, naganago, mekoche chestakomaki. Nera, daga, da kots nagotine siku, Sarah D. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me English privilege in a colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. My late great-grandfather is Milo B. Wolf from Delaney. His daughter, Alice, is my now late granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act Imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act Imposed status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ+, genderqueer community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the Quality of Life Report of 2024 from the Calgary Foundation, life is harder if you are part of a racialized group. 42% of the members of a racialized group do not have timely access to culturally appropriate health and well-being services, and 40% of members of a racialized group cannot find suitable employment, which is up from 31% from last year. I am not surprised. I'm not a social worker, nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share my journey as a Dene mother navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma-informed Dene woman who attempted to run, joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to be at those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for colonial incarceration, a denial of justice, denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples. I have work to continue, reports to advocate for, and attempt to work within those systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for the so-called country called Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never be 1 month. It's important to understand that this straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. I'm just going to share a quick story for folks who don't follow me on social media. I just absolutely have paperwork fatigue from September, but I had to do some. And one of the questions I had from the public education system was asking me if my family is Catholic. And it was ironic because I had to do it at the end of September, which September 30th is supposed to be the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And here on paperwork in 2024, the Calgary Public Education is still asking, "Are you a Roman Catholic?" Very clearly. And I posted it. It didn't get any traction, but it's just the point that we have Christian outsiders dictating all of this colonial paperwork that we all have to do, imposing so much trauma from their past of forcing Christian belief systems on these lands. And in a time of so called reconciliation, I'm still having to acknowledge whether or not I'm Catholic. I graduated high school in 1994. 1996 was when the last residential school was closed. 1997, according to others. So, it's really important for Canadians and Calgarians to understand the gravity of these things. And I don't think they do because they're not hurt by the trauma that was imposed. Anyway, land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in this so called time of reconciliation. Of course, they can be performative, and we see it all the time. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning, otherwise, you're just creating more harm. I encourage folks to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement. So, we as Indigenous peoples know how safe you are to be around. Because if you won't pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, you won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, you don't acknowledge stolen lands, imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself as we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance or worse, willful anti Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, you show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book, Unreconciled, explains this perfectly, as do many other Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As a former geomatics drafter, I would love to teach you more, but pay me and go to nativecalgarian.com for more. With that, I'm going to welcome my guest today. Carolyn, would you like to introduce yourself in your way?
Oh, thank you so much. Hugsqual to Noyap, Carolyn Roberts, Gunnitsna, Tanachate las Cohomish, Okmeach, Naquaqua, Okmeach, Shiakton, Okmeach, Chin Kunmantomi, and Hak and Squalwin, Kunsque, Kunsnachnomi. My heart is full and thankful to be with you today and have a conversation with you and listen to this beautiful work that you're doing. Um, I'm Carolyn. I belong to the Squamish Nation Indian band in Vancouver, in North Vancouver. My hereditary lines are my mother is Janet Thefarge, and she comes from the Naquaqua Nation, and that's where our ancestors are from. And if you know Lower BC at all, it's up just past Whistler in that beautiful territory. On my father's side, on my lineage, on my father's side, I am from the Shiakton Nation, from the Stolo territory, and my late father was Ed Kelly, and that the territory is the Chilliwack area in the
Mm,
Vancouver area. I've been an educator for a really long time in the K-12 system. In the past 6 years, I've been in higher ed teaching teachers. And yeah, I teach them about all of the things that you were talking about. Um, and sometimes, yeah, just as much as I possibly can in the shortest amount of time that the university gives us to be able to give them any kind of foundational knowledge to move the understanding of what it means to be on these territories. I'm coming to you today from the unsurrendered stolen lands of the Katzie and the Kwantlen and the Semiahmoo people who have lived and nurtured and cared for this land for thousands and thousands of years. And in order to honor and respect them, as an uninvited guest upon they're my relatives' territories, it's my responsibility as an educator to make sure that I educate those around me about the shared colonial history of this place known as Canada today, so that people can understand what it means to be upon this land and what has happened to make it what it is today in this moment.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. Thank you for doing that
Mhm.
incredible work. I think it's a real shame when it comes to education, but I'll tell you a win that I was really happy for. So my people are originally from Northwest Territories, and I have always struggled with. I was born here in Calgary, and moving up north because I'm a bougie urban native, and I'm used to be able to go and get a movie whenever I want or whichever, and, so I've been nervous about heading up north and losing the southern services. But in, the Northwest Territories, they used to use the Alberta curricula for their K-12 program, and then
Mhm.
when all of this madness started happening with conservatives deciding which truth they want to tell and to basically be anti-Indigenous, the Northwest Territories said, "Yeah, I think we're gonna switch to BC." So I think the work that you're doing obviously is gonna help my relatives up north. They are obviously fostering fantastic educational, resources that are specific to our territory, and that's fantastic. But I also am grateful that the curricula is coming from BC now because and I'm sad to say this is my daughter's grade 12, and I don't know what's gonna happen to the next generations of Albertan kids because they are just I despite the best efforts of the teachers, I have nothing but good things to say about the high school that my daughter is in right now, and she had a wonderful K to, 6 experience, but 6 to 9. That's another story, and that was during the pandemic too. So she
Yeah.
was struggling so bad in that school, I have nothing to say other than I'd rather burn that place to the ground, that we homeschooled her for 2 years before, she went back into high school thanks to the guidance of a wonderful person, but, a few Native, people, actually women, that really got her to go back into that, and I should be using they, them. We're trying to decolonize our language because I was taught that our family, our people had to invent he and she because
Yep.
everyone was they and them. So, I'm straight and I'm cis, and I do feel kinda, like, weird about trying to reclaim and decolonize the language, but at the same time, like, you have to start somewhere. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. I had the beautiful opportunity to go up to the Northwest Territories twice to help and present to different locations up there to talk about what does it mean to decolonize and how can we put in Indigenous content within the curriculum. It's yeah, they have beautiful resources up there. I left with a suitcase full of books, and I'm just so thankful for the opportunity to learn about the land and learn about the people of the land and have that knowledge exchange. And I'm super excited for them to be able to walk in the curriculum in a different way than they have been.
Oh, I love that. I'm so grateful. So do you wanna talk about a certain book?
Maybe this book here.
I'd like to hear all about this book.
Yeah. So I just wrote this book called Restoring Education, Decolonizing Your Practice with a Critical Lens. I'm super excited about its trajectory and how people are taking it up. It just came out on September 10th this year. It's already been on the Globe and Mail's bestseller list. Um,
Nice.
and we were just so shy of the Toronto Star bestseller list last week. So I have lots of of good feelings and hope that the book will reach the people that it needs to get to. And it talks about lots of things that you were talking about in your opening, about those connections and those understandings of what the history of this place is, and making those connections to our own understandings, because we haven't been taught it within
Mhm.
our own system, our own education system. So now we have to take it upon ourselves to learn. So I put some history in it. I put some like personal experiences that I've experienced through the education system, being a 60 scoop baby, and what that means. And like you were also talking about, because I present fairly white, it was fairly easy for me to mingle in an all white neighborhood, in pretty much an all white school. We had very a small amount of minorities. We actually only had one Black student in our school. And thinking back now, like how difficult that must have been for them.
Sure.
Um, so I put some of those experiences within the book, and experiences in post-secondary as well as an Indigenous human. And then I just talk about how the system is, and how do we take this holistic framework of Indigenous pedagogies, and where are the places and spaces we can integrate that into the system that's today. And then through that, I talk about the land, how we connect to the land, how we understand the stories from the land.
Mm.
And then my favorite part is at the beginning of each chapter, there's a QR code that sends you to a music playlist. So I wanted to really uplift the voices of Indigenous people doing amazing things. So some of it's music, some of it's talks, and there's lots of places within the book that gives you lots of resources that you can further your learning, because this isn't all the information you're going to need. It's just an open invitation to step into what else do I need to know more of.
Right, and, like, every Native I know, regardless of our mental capacity to read, we all just seem to have all the books, and I but I know that, like, for me, I had to really decolonize. Now, my situation's a little different. I wasn't 60 scooped. My dad was white, and when my parents divorced, in the '80s, obviously, all of the rights went to the white man over the Indigenous woman. So I was raised white. I was raised in an all-white school, and it's really weird unpacking the gravity of that today because the last Indian hospital closed in 1996, the same time the last Indian residential school did. Arguably 1997 because that was
Yeah.
Cowes First Nation too.
Yeah.
I graduated high school in 1994. So by my dad getting me, I didn't have to go to Indian residential school. And when I had a brother who had a horrific accident and had to be taken to the Alberta Children's Hospital. But if it wasn't for my dad, he probably would have went to an Indian hospital instead.
Hmm.
So I think
Yeah.
about the gravity of that proximity to whiteness all the
Hmm.
time, because
Right.
while I wasn't 60 scooped, it's an understanding that there were two different worlds in the 90s and the 80s, depending because segregation, I mean, it's still enforced, obviously, with the Indian Act and reserves, but that concept, I did not like fully understand it at that time. And that's my lifetime, that's your lifetime, that's our lifetime.
Yeah.
And I know Canadians don't understand it all. And in fact, they're
Right.
so ignorant about it. So it's been a lot of unlearning for me. And, reclaiming has been more my daughter's generation. They can do the
Mhm.
reclaiming, like
Uh,
seeing the programming available for them, seeing resources available for them. Now we can talk about Indian residential schools, and we just couldn't.
nope.
It's like we weren't allowed to talk about anything like that before the 2000s and the conversation for the TRC commission really started happening.
Yeah.
So I just can't believe how much has changed in such a short period of time, which I'm grateful for. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong. So yeah, I can't, like, I think about educators like you and so many Indigenous people that are in these public school systems in the universities, and how trying to convince arrogant pompous people who have, well, I graduated from Yale and Harvard, and I went to McGill, and I went, and it's like, yeah, but you know nothing about Indigenous people. I'll
Mhm.
never forget being in political rooms, talking to people with PhDs, talking to lawyers with PhDs, and them knowing nothing about the Indian Act. And I was like,
Yeah.
how am I as a native teaching you about something you've never heard of before? How is that even possible? So now, obviously, they really resent a forced education, which is deplorable because instead of looking at it like that, I wish they seen it as you were taught lies. You spent 40,000, 60,000, $100,000 to be taught lies in those institutions. So here's a free Indigenous education course for you to take, and they resent it. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always challenging when you're in colonial spaces to be able to navigate that and navigate the conversations of why it's important. And I really think when I think about the institution and the things that I have come up against being in institutions, I always think back to one of our matriarchs is Joanne Archibald. And when she started in education, there was 4 Indigenous educators in British Columbia. So like how much has shifted and changed since then,
Yeah.
thanks to her, thanks to Verna Kirkness, these trailblazers, strong women who fought back and did it in such a way that in like it's in such an indigenous way of just doing the work, talking what she needs to be talking about and doing the work and continuing to do that work, to now when I have the luxury, and I do call it a luxury and a privilege, that the program that Verna Kirkness started and Joanne taught in, I have 28 Indigenous students from all over different areas in my first year Indigenous teacher education program. And I
Amazing.
get the privilege to walk with them. And I couldn't, like, I almost burst into tears the first day because I just couldn't believe having a full class of just Indigenous students, because I didn't get that until
Mhm.
I was in my master's cohort. And my master's cohort shifted and changed me in ways that I had no idea. And I just think back to if I had never had that opportunity to be in an all Indigenous cohort with mainly Indigenous faculty and reading mainly Indigenous authors, if I'd never had that, I wouldn't be writing the story. I wouldn't be in higher ed.
Oh,
All of those pieces. But if we can see ourselves in education and see the people and those opportunities, change is coming. And I agree, my kids are going to be part of that. And I'm thankful that they get to be. Um, but it's, yeah, it's from the work that we have continued to do, and this is my part in it, and they're going to have their part, and hopefully when I have grandchildren, they'll have a part too, right? I know I always cross my fingers. I don't know, but I just, yeah, so thinking about, yeah, how challenging it is, but then when those spots open up, that I just am so thrilled to be a part of what's coming next.
oh, I feel you so much on that. Like, um, I don't know if my listeners understand the gravity of the trailblazing you're doing. We have a wonderful organization called the Calgary Foundation, and they have this fabulous man that's there. His name is Tim Fox. He's from this. This is his territory, and he always talks about edge walking and how hard that is. Right, having knowing two worlds and trying to help create a new path that's never been there before. So I think it's really important work you're doing, and what you just described just gave me chills because I can't imagine actually being in a room full of just Indigenous people and doing that trailblazing work. But I'm seeing it. I'm seeing more of it. I'm seeing the Emmys with all of these Indigenous creators, right? I'm seeing TikToks with our people showcasing their ridiculous humor. That's absolutely inappropriate that we need because it's so ridiculous, the situation of colonialism. So I so appreciate all of the work you and so many other people are doing right now. And what I find with this podcast is because I'm not funded. So I'm not funded by somebody who says, I don't know if you should swear. I don't know if you should say the word genocide. And it's like, no, I'm not being controlled, folks. That's not the way it is. My hope in doing this and having these real conversations is that we really explain an Indigenous, like, a lot of Indigenous people are uncomfortable with racism, talking about colonialism, talking about genocide, but it's like I just feel like it doesn't matter. We have to talk about this. Like I wish I didn't have to, but kind of back to what you were saying, thanks to the work of so many other people, I have the privilege to actually, that
Mhm.
it is a privilege, and I honor that. And I honor that I get to speak a truth for the first time. I said at a podcast summit, I've never heard of an Indigenous or a Satu Dene woman ever taking a mic. Never, never heard of it. So for me, like, it is important for, as you said, that representation.
Yeah.
When I listen to mainstream media, obviously you're hearing still colonial mainstream media, even if they have a few Indigenous shows here or there, sprinkled with a few Indigenous journalist, but for the most part, you're just still hearing colonial narratives. So, from my point of view, hearing an educator like yourself trying to do systemic changes within these systems, like, it's hard work, one, but do
Yeah.
you feel that you have a support system? Like, do you think that there's starting to be more and more of a support network?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And we talk about it a lot because m- there's a lot of Indigenous women within educational systems, and I think that when we find each other, we gravitate towards each other instinctively. And then we're able to have those conversations in places where we can do the work. I have been so fortunate this last little bit that I've moved positions to UBC.
Mm,
And UBC has Indigenous education cohort, or a program. And then it also has the Office of Indigenous Education, where our office has, I want to say, 7 Indigenous people in it. So I haven't had that in higher education. This is the first time, and the first time that I've really felt comfortable and happy in the space. My husband just said that like last week. He goes, "It's written all over you right now." And he goes, "And I can't explain the difference, but it's just written on you, and you seem so much happier." And I'm so super thankful for that and the opportunities that I do get. So I do have a network of folks that I obviously that are my go-to, like, circle of Indigenous aunties. But then I also do have a workplace, safe place as well, and people that know and understand. Because sometimes you don't want the answer to things. Sometimes you just have to say ah, and just and and then move on, because there's not much you can do about it. So then, yeah, so stepping into it, into a different location, and having that is really important.
that's amazing. Well, I'd love to hear more about the book
Okay.
itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So, putting the book together was a combination of what I've been teaching and what I've been presenting. I present all over British Columbia. I've been up to the Northwest Territories. I also went to Onion Lake Cree Nation, which is just on the border there of Alberta and Saskatchewan. They're taking the opportunity to redo their curriculum.
Mhm.
And what does decolonization look like? So when I personally, because I'm such a teacher, that's who I am, that's who I was meant to be, I'm always
Yeah.
have been, and I always will be. I really think about how can I get the information that educators need who are terrified of stepping into Indigenous education. So this is a combination of all my teaching and presentations is in this book of questions that people ask. One of them is, of course, of what you were starting with, was the land acknowledgement. And we was super lucky. I got to open the floor space for Wab Gishin Rice when he
Oh,
came. I know his books are so good. So, like, he's such a brilliant writer, and he's right.
he's in my on my book club on Monday, so
Oh, so good. And he's such an amazing human to
yeah.
boot, right?
Yeah.
He's like I yeah. Anyways, I got to open for him, and what I did and what I wanted the people to get and to understand that were coming to see him is this territory of my ancestors. This is what the territory looked like prior to contact.
Yeah.
This is some of the things that were around this area at this time and how we used this land. And then through colonization, this happened and this happened from this territory that has shape shifted this territory. I use those land acknowledgements as segments of teaching for other people to understand this land prior. And so my hope with land acknowledgements is that we get to learn about the space, but then sharing with others so that they want to learn about the space and tell other stories that they have found out. So that importance of knowing and understanding and being with the land is really critically important. Some of the things that I get my students to do is to go to their favorite place
Mm,
and take pictures. What's the story being told today at this place? What are the plaques? What are like what does it look like? And who's the space created for? And especially to get them to start to think about parks are man-made and they're made for people, not for the more than humans. So thinking about that aspect, because I don't think we've ever asked people to think about that.
yeah.
And then thinking about what did it look like prior?
Yeah.
Here, we're in a tempered rainforest. So before settlement, the trees were so massive, it'd be 30 people holding hand in hand to wrap around a bottom of one of our cedar trees. That's how massive they were.
Yeah.
So thinking about that landscape and how different that would be in comparison to what it looks like today. Those are the things that I'm starting to get the students to be thinking about and to be curious about because there's so much in our education that we haven't been taught. What do we need to know?
Yes.
So, like that connection to the land, connection to story. And when I use the word restorying, it really is that narrative that we've been taught is one-sided Western colonial education system. We know more about Rome and Italy and everything over there and nothing about here. So we need to change that story to include more stories of here and the people from here.
Yes. Oh my God. I feel like there goes 10 pounds. Absolutely. That's what we need. And everyone needs to know that. And everyone needs to be doing that
Right?
work. And
Yeah.
my like I am so excited for the next generations. I'm going to tell you a quick story because
Okay.
you as a teacher and all of your people need to know this. So I did this amazing thing that another teacher actually created here, and it was the Indigenous cash grab. So I was in a cab, and I was in a cab on October 4th, so Sisters in Spirit Vigil Day. And my job was to educate and, ask questions. And if people got it right, then they would get $10 off of their cab fare. So I was in this really, this was such a funny, my last one, there was three kids and mom. And the girl was, it was her 18th birthday. She was going to the Alberta Children's Hospital for the last, like, you're no longer a child, you have to become an adult now, so this is your last session with us. And she had a 7-year-old brother, and I'm asking questions about October 4th. And in my intro, I basically give them all the answers in case they don't know, right? And then hopefully they just remember in the 10 minutes. And then I asked them questions. And this 7-year-old was just getting angry. He's like, look, I'm going to tell you the story about Orange Shirt. And I just kind of smiled to myself and I'm like, please tell me. So he told me all about Phyllis and told me about the story about going to Indian residential school. And because this was obviously drilled into him, you
Right.
know, so they got one of our questions wrong. So I gave him the $10 for that, for his incredible story, right? Because clearly mom needed to hear it. So
Right. Oh, that's so
So
awesome.
whatever work is getting done by teachers like yourself that act legitimately care, like it was drilled in this kid, and he was like ready. Now, if we can just get folks to understand the gravity of October 4th, so he feels that passionate on October 4th.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
So
Oh,
cute.
that makes that's made my heart so happy. And
Yeah.
I really believe, and that was part of the writing in the book, is that I really believe this next generation is going to be able to move mountains that I never thought could move. When I first started teaching, My biggest thing was being so mad at Ryerson University for being called Ryerson University. They had a letter on their website that said, "We understand Ryerson and his complicated history, but we refuse to change the name and we are not going to have a conversation about that."
Yeah.
So when the 215 came back to us, it was their voice was loud enough.
Yeah, the
And
shame was there. We had the
right?
same thing happen here in Calgary. We were working with Langevin School to try to get that name changed, and they were pretty staunch. They didn't wanna do it, and so when it was the 215 that came out, they finally did. Unfortunately, this year, we have, John A. Macdonald High School in the Calgary Board of Education that they set up a committee waiting for the kids that were pushing for it to age out, and now that the kids are gone, the committee dissolved, and we found
Mm,
out in August. So,
it's
yeah,
heartbreaking.
like, no question, we're getting all of the pushback here in Calgary. I think this is the heart of the hate, I'm not gonna lie. I think that we are, the heart of conservatism, the heart of anti-Indigenous conversations, anti-colonial conversations, so they have an agenda, and of course, they're gonna push it through the Alberta Board of Education the most, right? So
Mhm.
changing that, and they just recently put up a Winston Churchill statue, actually, here. Yeah, no, we get all of the hate mongers that have nothing but negative things to say about people of color. We honor them here.
Mhm,
That
right?
tells you who's in positions of power here though too, right? So
Right?
that's
And
what's happening here. But I do know this little kid was telling me the truth
yeah,
forcefully. So my hope is in, 20 years, these are the kids that are going to be like, yeah, so we're changing that name and just quietly get it done because
mhm,
it's just too much to be
yeah.
sending indigenous kids to a John A. Macdonald High School. That's disgusting. So,
Right? And
yeah.
I think that that was one of the reasons why I put the history at the very beginning of the book. Somebody had asked me like, how did you figure out what to put in and what to take out? And I think a lot of it is I picked the key moments that I teach the most about, and then I put in resources. You can learn more about this here. You can learn more about this here. Because I really want to people to like understand the gravity of it. And I think the the best part of my learning that I've ever done is is with Maurice Sinclair. He came out to UBC, and because he's a lawyer, he had such a different perspective on things than I did as an educator, and how he wrapped it in the understanding of the law was like a pivotal moment for me. So at the end of the chapter of history, I use his framework of thinking to say, so indigenous people wanted to fight for this, and then they changed the law. And then they wanted to fight for this, and then they changed the law. And then they wanted to fight for this, and then they changed the law to show the gravity of all of these things that I've just explained to you. We have been fighting. It's not that we haven't been fighting. We have been fighting since contact
Hmm.
about a lot of issues, and these are the things that you need to know. And there's lots of places you can go. There's lots of books with lots of information in them. So it's the point of you actually stepping into the work and doing the work. So it's really, like I said, it's an invitation. Here's some things. Let's learn some more.
Yeah, exactly. Let's work on them. I really appreciate you writing this book. I can't wait to order it and have it be a part of my world because what I find, especially on days I get discouraged, I'll
Mhm.
just grab a book that I know is empowering and I'll start reading part of it. And I'm just going to tell you a quick Maurice Sinclair story. About 10 years ago when all of us natives were starting to like find each other on Facebook and such, obviously, following and sharing anything he put on there. And anyway, my daughter, they are 17 today and I didn't want to get them Indian status until they understood what like real consent. Like, okay, when you get your status, that means you're going to be treated poorly in hospitals. That means the police are going to have you on record. That means your CSIS is going to have you on a list. Like, are you sure? Are you sure? And so we talked about what that looks like, talked about resilience, talked about rebellion, all of these conversations. And when she was like, Mom, I want my status, I was like, okay. But it was Murray Sinclair who said, get that girl her status. And I'm like, oh my God. So this is a wild. So like years actually of us going back and forth with Indian Affairs with guarantor signatures and passport photos. And so we did it 3 times in order to finally do this. And because she was at that fun age of 15, 16, 17, it was like this paperwork has to be done. No, now this paperwork has to be done. No, now this one. So we finally in the mail last night, got her status. And ironically, this is so ironic. You and I know it's supposed to be a national holiday for federal employees, yet miraculously, her status was issued on September 30th. And I just thought that's kind of a nod to Mr. Sinclair.
Right?
Being like there's a bigger power.
Yep. Yep, for sure. Right?
Yep, yep. And he's coming to Calgary next week to talk about
Oh.
his newest book. So obviously I got my ticket and I'm going and seeing with his son. His son is coming. So oh yeah, you got it already.
And I also have Tanya Talaga's new one, and I
Yep.
have Ellen Gabriel's one. I have so much reading to do.
Same. And that's why I started a book club in 2016. It's only one a month. And honestly, I'm like, maybe we should do 2 a month because it's just not enough. Because there's so many great books coming out. And if I
Right.
give myself a timeline, then I will follow it. I was just recently diagnosed with ADHD. This is me medicated. And I'm still like this. Right. So if I give myself a deadline, then I'll read the book or at least get started into it and have a good idea of the book before I finish it. So
Yeah.
I love reading. And now that we have these, unfortunately, all I ever want to do is just like read somebody else's new article or what's happening in the Supreme Court or
Yep.
unfortunately we have police killings here all the time. So
Yeah.
I'm always kind of on top of those types of things and trying to release statements and working like that. So I wish we were paid to do all of this, but I'm grateful for folks like you who do get paid and are in these positions and have all of the colonial paperwork to be like, okay, we respect you enough to listen. And honestly, right, you know what I'm talking about.
I
So
know.
so I am grateful you're doing this work. Is there anything else you want to tell me about the book or the work you're doing?
Um, no, what, of course there is.
I know, right? I'm like, I gotta respect your time. I can't
I
go
don't.
too long, but
I just I've just really encourage all educators, and especially educators that might be in a system that doesn't foresee the importance of Indigenous education. I know that in British Columbia, we have a strong movement towards moving towards making sure it's in all of our classrooms and all the work we do. And how my book is presented is ways that they can step into it. I talk about what their role is as a non-Indigenous educator, but there's as much stuff for Indigenous educators as for non-Indigenous educators in the book. I've been receiving so many lovely messages that they're going to be putting the book in their teacher education programs as the textbook. So that's fabulous. And one message that was just super um, lift, like soul filling, but also sad was a friend just said, I don't feel like I've ever been seen as much as I feel seen within your work. And knowing that her children struggle in the school system, it was good to be able to read and have that. And another educator was just like, because of your book, it allowed me and gave me permission to use my voice in the system. She goes, so I'm doing that, and I'm going to speak back to what I know needs to change. And so, like, things that you don't, that you hope that comes out in your work, it's coming out. And I mean, it's been a few weeks, right? So I am hopefully looking forward to a long journey with this book and with educators, and hopefully changing how we educate.
Carolyn, I have good news and I have bad news. Good news is you're changing hearts, minds, and inspiring people. The bad news is we're going to expect sequels and build on that. So
Right? And it's okay because I love it. I'm so in. Actually,
right
my
on.
my next project is a picture book,
Yeah.
about Red Dress Day. So
Thank
I'm gonna send
God.
it to you once we have it up and going. We're in the beginning stages. I have a beautiful Indigenous community surrounding me doing this work, so it is done in a respectful, kind way, but it'll be geared towards grade 1, 2, and 3.
Yes. So grateful to hear that. You know, I've been fighting for 10 years in feminist spaces and gender diverse spaces for them to understand the gravity
Mhm.
of if you implemented 231 calls to justice, it would help your feminism. It would help your queer world. But anti-racism in these groups that think they're progressive, holy Hannah, like they are so steadfast in their anti-indigenous bias.
Mhm.
And it so to me, like that's the next hurdle we have is to get
Yeah.
this real solidarity because people will say, "Oh my God, Black Lives Matter," but then call the cops on somebody who's black. Or as teachers, you know, assume black boys are going to cause troubles or indigenous boys. And it's like, that's your racism coming out. So
Mhm.
like we need to have that conversation too. And anyway, I'm sure a lot of that's already covered in your book about anti-indigenous bias
Yeah.
and you know anti-race bias in general. I mean, bias is such an ugly it's so insidious. Even myself, I'm unpacking bias that I see regularly and I think you know as people who have the audacity to talk about it, we have to be doing that work within ourselves too, right? So
100%. Yeah.
yeah, I really appreciate you working on that because that's the next hurdle is that gendered violence and understanding that through an Indigenous lens. So I'm really excited for all the work you're doing. I can't thank you enough for writing this book. I know I'm going to be inspired by reading it too. So thank you. And when we do the book club, obviously we'll have to have you come in and hear the feedback because most of the people in my okay, so I should tell you the book club kind of ended up as the Reconciliation Action Group because we read all the Truth and Reconciliation Commission books, like the whole report. We read
Amazing.
the whole National Inquiry and so
Whoa,
you
good.
have people who are
Yeah.
like inspired. Okay, so now we know what to do. How do we do it? So that was how the Reconciliation Action Group became kind of a thing. But it is predominantly teachers or retired teachers and folks that know better and know the importance of education. So hopefully we'll get moving in that way and go from there. But we also have some artists and I appreciate that because I may have undiagnosed autism but I definitely have ADHD. So sometimes I need an artist to kind of like blow my mind up a bit and let me see reconciliation in through their lens. That really helps me a lot. So you know, I'm hoping that will manifest in Red Dress Day and such in the school systems one day too. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was
All
so
right.
lovely. Thank you for connecting. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you.
I am too, and I can't wait to put it out there. We're obviously going to put your book in our preamble as well so that people will just like click a link and go buy it and hopefully go from there. So thanks, Carolyn. And please know you're welcome back on my podcast anytime. I try to amplify Indigenous voices and especially ones doing like leadership roles and like yourself, writing the books, doing the work in these institutions. I so appreciate you from the bottom of my heart because to you and I know the next generations, that's what matters. So,
Yep.
yeah, thank you. All
Thank
right.
you.
And of course, I invite you to chime in if you have time as I do my exit, as people are always welcome to do. I want to thank obviously the Reconciliation Action Group for all of the great work that they did for the Sisters in Spirit vigils we did on October 4th. I just have to say thank you to Skipping Stone. Skipping Stone is an organization here in Calgary that the rest of the country is jealous of. Thank you very much. And they do gender affirming care. And they actually donated to our Sisters in Spirit Vigil. Like there's not a lot of queer organizations that understand it, but Skipping Stone is working really hard with anti-racism and an Indigenous lens and understanding oppression dynamics at a different level. So I can't encourage folks enough to help them as Alberta's trans organizations are under attack, as trans kids are under attack. And of course, we have a study showing how many more attempted suicides there's been since our politicians have decided to do anti-trans rhetoric. Really important, again, for folks to understand healthy boundaries. And if you want to come join our book club on Monday, I've already kind of was showing on our YouTube channel, Moon of the Turning Leaves is Monday's book club, which is technically Thanksgiving. But for me, I can't think of a better way to spend Thanksgiving or Christopher Columbus Day in the States than to be reading an Indigenous artist that's talking about a post-apocalyptic world. So you're welcome to join us. And if Walt can join us, he will. And I hope you join us too. I'm proud that this podcast gives solution and cultural safety training, cultural first aid, in all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous peoples, people of color, those with disabilities, and to us LGBTQ to speak. According to the 2024 Quality of Life Report from Calgary Foundation, 87% of members of a racialized group has experienced discrimination based on religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation, and at least some of the time. Now, supposedly, 50% of Calgarians are committed to anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I would love to hear what their idea of what that is. But anyway, you can find more of this in the Quality of Life Report of 2024 from the Calgary Foundation if you want to learn more. I want to thank Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca. They have a wonderful section on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. I highlight that here to help settlers with their reconciliation work, because if you're not coming from an Indigenous lens and focused lens and you're creating harm, you're not reconciling. Internalized racism or lateral violence is another form of violence we face thanks to the structure of racism imposed on these lands. I love racialequitytools.org. They have tons of resource files, and they have one on internalized racism by Donna Bevins. If you have some cash, give it to Skipping Stone, give it to racialequitytools.org. So American Friends Service Committee, afsc.org, has a wonderful list of things that you can do if you are a bystander watching racism happening to somebody else. If you see or experience racism, please report it to acttoendracism.ca or text at 587-507-3838 if you're in the Calgary area. I also encourage folks to watch the Journey of Becoming an Anti-Racism Leader. It's on YouTube. It's through the city of Calgary. So there's tons of information there. Stop the Stack YYC has some wonderful information on a regular basis of explaining how oppressive the justice system is here in Calgary, how unfortunately they've legally targeted so many folks, the Alberta justice system and the policing. So please follow that work and see how you can look at racism with a more intersectional lens and hopefully support our Black Lives Matter Calgary activists as they go through this unfair system, and members of our queer community as well. Indigenous have been talking about the issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their platforms and their policies. And I'm sharing daily some of the horrid things that are coming both out of Alberta's conservatives as well as the national ones. Things that are important. If you are voting for cutting violence prevention programs, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, attack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, trans folks, folks with disabilities, Know that your vote for that party is directly negatively impacting marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to actions, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples 1996. Multiple reports about child welfare reform. They come out yearly here in Alberta under the Office of the Youth and Child, the Child and Youth committee. I can't remember, but I share it all the time. So please follow that stuff. Like, it's out there. We have recommendations now on child welfare reform, violence prevention program. A lot of this is through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to actions and the 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Provincially, Alberta created 113 pathways to justice. So hold them to account on that. Municipally, we have the White Goose Flying Report. Hold them account to that. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. I also want to give a plug into the National Indigenous Economic Strategy. They have recommendations. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the educational, health, all institutions, actually, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they have zero business running. This should be understood by everyone. For we are supposed to stand for human rights. Local politicians, community organizations, your schools, your sports clubs, Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies, because there's tons of them. And of course, the Calgary Foundation has a great ally toolkit. Let me know what your struggles are with those resources I give you. Another important one that I encourage everyone to sign up for is the Missing Children Society of Canada, as well as the aboriginalalert.ca. They're giving out these notices of missing people immediately. I know a lot of people will only share RCMP or Calgary Police or Edmonton Police with a case number, but these have those case numbers. So your anti-Indigenous bias is definitely coming out if you are unwilling to share Aboriginal Alert or the Missing Children of Canada's stuff. Really important information has come out about how Alberta is trying to basically hide the amount of drug crisis deaths that are coming out. I can't emphasize enough, we've had over 10,000 people die since 2016 here in Alberta alone. So if you are using substances, please don't use alone. If you are using a loan, you can create safety plans. You can download the Brave Doors or Lifeguard app, or you can call the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS for support. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca. You can also donate to them. They provide free one-on-one addictions counseling services, group treatment for recovery in Calgary. They're queer-friendly and anti-racism. If you been following me, you know I fully support Canada's first 2S LGBTQ Addiction Recovery Center here in Calgary, the stonewallrecovery.ca. If you're experiencing any emotional distress after anything I talked about today or we talked about, please call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness Helpline at 855-242-3310. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can go to their website, hopeforwellness.ca. They have a little text box there. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. Here in Alberta, we have the 60 Scoops Indigenous Society of Alberta. Please sign up at ssisa.ca and support the work they're doing. Indian Residential School Survivors and Family Hotline, 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone, 1-800-668-6868. You can text 686868. And there is a Native Youth Crisis Hotline at 877-209-1266. The LGBT Youth line no longer exists, but you can text at 647-694-4275, or you can go to youthline.ca ca for more. For non-Indigenous people, I encourage you to go to your local distress center. There's usually a functioning 211 in your area, and the new national number of 988. You can also text 988, or you can go to 988.ca. The following are 2S LGBT crisis supports available across Canada. If you're in Toronto, you're so lucky. You have a wonderful Indigenous-led crisis support pilot led by the Two Spirit people of the First Nations there and two other colonial organizations. Find out more at the number two, spirits.org. But if you're in that Toronto area, only have to call 211. Lucky. My American friends. Two Spirit Identity, strongheartshelpline.org or 1-844-7-NATIVE, 1-844-762-8433. Thank you to all of my listeners in the States and across the globe. I'm always shocked when I see the numbers of people who listen everywhere. So I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Back here in Canada, itgetsbettercanada.org. Tons of resources for 2S LGBTQ. Just a warning for QT BIPOC. Seen some of the orgs listed in Alberta, and not all of them practice anti-racism or have Indigenous education. So you may want to try the MMIW line just because it has more a gender diverse anti-racism, pro-Indigenous lens. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation faces it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. It's why I started the podcast, to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, leadership shame, and gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear our opinions, but like to tell us theirs, even if they know nothing about us, nothing about colonialism, the constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protests, our vigils, and our rights. I and many others share information on like small microaggressions and big ones. And so it's unacceptable. Be trauma informed. People like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeeping, folks that survive off the status quo. And like recently, people who are so in their trauma, like they take all of the resources available. And so like I need to put my effort towards that. So if you're a settler, we have the books. I give you the books. Read the books. Don't ask me to be doing this for you unless you're paying me. Internal, external racism is an everyday reality for me, Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and more. I want to say thank you. Thank you, Masi Cho, to my ancestors, to my granny, to my mom, of what strength looks like through your example. I wouldn't be here without what you had to go through. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family, and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I'm a second generation. I want to say thank you to my husband. He has produced and edited this show, but he's my husband. He's my childhood friend, father of our child, and my support down the journey of this red road. He has witnessed decades of sexism and racism, and to our child, we are so blessed to learn from you daily and honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be the best person I can be. And I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues. I honor the Blackfooted as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you to the previous donors for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And last, let's do some touch grass things. I talk about a lot of dark things, but I guess this one's kind of dark. So the other day, my brother went out to smudge his lungs. He's more spiritual than I am. Just kidding. He's just a smoker. Anyway, he goes, Northern lights are really strong. So we go outside and I could not believe the colors that I was seeing. I think I'm starting to lose my green in my eyes, but like we're in the middle of the city with all the light pollution. And the pictures I took out my backyard on my phone were ridiculous. So, I just wanted to say thank you for all of those photos that I've seen people put up there. But I had one Indigenous friend say, "That's because of all the work we did the week before." And I was like, "Ooh, that hit hard." I love that. And I always end with side eye to those Calgary rabbits. "You're lucky I'm not your dish." And my beautiful cousin would respond, "Are you being my dish?" Thanks, folks, for listening.